Hello, everyone. My name is Joy Riggs. I'm the author of Crackerjack Bands and Hometown Boosters, the story of the Minnesota Music Man. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from chapter 17 of my book, which is called A Yankee Family Returns to Dixie. To prepare for our vacation, Steve pored over guidebooks. I reviewed my notes about Jasper's service and Gialver's 1906 trip, and I reread Tony Horowitz's nonfiction book, Confederates in the Attic. In one chapter, Horowitz meets tourists whose ancestors fought at Shiloh, and he feels envious, writing, "They had a blood tie to a patch of American soil that I never would." That statement resonated with me. An odd mixture of pride and curiosity compelled me to investigate the blood tie I had to Vicksburg and Shiloh, knowing if Jasper hadn't survived those battles, my kids and I wouldn't exist, and all the lives that emanated from Jasper's would be erased. I could only speculate on what it meant to Gialver to visit the military parks some 40 years after his dad fought there. We prepared the kids by watching parts of The Civil War, a film by Ken Burns. I hadn't seen it since it debuted on PBS in September of 1990, around the time I started working at the newspaper in Natchez, Mississippi. Louisa and Sebastian both enjoyed it, as I'd expected. Sebastian was a history buff, and Louisa was always interested in a well-told story. Elias, however, spent much of the film lying on the rug under the coffee table, wishing we were watching something else. He had a low tolerance for complicated historical explanations. He also had a quick, dry wit. He would be the wild card on this trip. Other than the hotel pool, what would interest him? When I asked him what he was most looking forward to, he said, the trip home. Ouch. To be fair, his great-great-great-grandfather likely shared that sentiment. We flew into Memphis in mid-October and drove first to Corinth, Mississippi, once a critical railroad juncture for the Confederacy. The Interpretive Center had a wealth of interactive displays and an engaging movie about the Battle of Shiloh. It also had a well-stocked gift shop where we bought a color-coded map of the battlefield and soldier caps known as kepis. Louisa and Sebastian chose blue, and our wild card child opted for gray. Jasper might have disapproved, but it reflected historical fact. Some brothers fought on opposite sides during the war. We drove next to the actual battlefield, 20 miles northeast of Corinth, across the Tennessee border. I'd read somewhere that Shiloh was one of the most pristine Civil War battlefields, and I could see why. Trees were everywhere, and many leaves had started turning various shades of orange and brown. Although we occasionally saw other visitors, we felt like we mostly had the 4,000-acre park to ourselves. We drove leisurely along the 12-mile path and took pictures at famous sites like the Hornet's Nest and the Peach Orchard. We also stopped to inspect stone memorials and cannons scattered along the route. Even with the map, we had trouble finding the memorial for Jasper's regiment. Steve slowed the car to a crawl. "It should be right there, I think," I said, pointing to a thicket off to my right. I saw nothing but tall grass and hardwood trees. "Maybe we need to get out and look," Steve said. He pulled off to the side of the road. Feeling adventurous, he and I made our own path through long grass and crunchy leaves, past a cannon and into the woods. The kids trailed behind. In a hushed clearing that was invisible from the road, a rectangular hunk of white marble stood more than 5 feet high. Raised letters near its top spelled Illinois. "I think that's it," I said. My heart beat faster as we approached. The inscription on the brass plaque said, "Went into battle on this line about 9 a.m., April 6, 1862, and maintained this position until 11 a.m., when it joined the division on a new line. The regiment lost 1 officer and 22 men killed, 17 officers and 170 men wounded, 3 men missing, total 213. We stood in silence. How could bloodshed have occurred in a place of such peace? The rest of the afternoon, we struggled with this contrast, the evidence of human brutality amid breathtaking natural beauty. The kids' favorite place was the cemetery. They loved the hills, the trees, and the view of the Tennessee River. The park pamphlet informed me that General Grant spent the night in that spot after the first day of battle. By the next morning, reinforcements arrived at Pittsburgh's Landing, which allowed Grant to push the Confederates back until they retreated to Corinth. I felt an extra connection to the spot, knowing that Gialver played a concert there. Maybe as he played taps, he gazed at the same view of the river we were enjoying. This is one of the coolest natural areas I've been to. I wish the dead would let us play capture the flag here. Wouldn't they want people to have fun? Sebastian asked. He gestured toward the rows and rows of white granite tombstones. I didn't know how to answer. I wasn't sure how to seek permission from the dead. The Shiloh National Cemetery, dedicated in 1889, contained 3,584 Civil War soldiers, 2,359 of them unknown. They played their own cruel version of Capture the Flag in this area and lost. They probably didn't mind kids having fun there now, as long as it was respectable fun. Our next stop was New Orleans, a 400-mile drive from Shiloh. Steve and I had both been to New Orleans before, but the kids hadn't, and we spent 3 days sightseeing. From New Orleans, we drove to my old reporting grounds in Natchez. Louisa was 2 when Steve and I last visited my former boss, Joan Gandy, and her husband, Tom. The Gandys owned a collection of negatives that documented 100 years of early Natchez history, and they had published several books. After Tom died in 2004, Joan became a minister and moved away. The town didn't seem the same without them. We ate lunch at Stanton Hall, a former antebellum mansion, where the restaurant's tiny biscuits were as delicious as ever. We also viewed an exhibit of the Gandy photo collection at their former church. During the 73-mile drive from Natchez to Vicksburg, we passed through Port Gibson. I told the kids that Grant admonished soldiers not to destroy the town because it was too beautiful to burn. Minutes later, as we passed some rundown mobile homes, Sebastian's voice rang out from the back seat. Where are we? I thought they said it was too beautiful to burn. The last time I visited Vicksburg, I was a 23-year-old reporter. Vern Smith, a black journalist originally from Natchez, had been sued for libel by a white county clerk over a story Smith wrote for Newsweek, and I was assigned to cover the trial for the Natchez Democrat. After 7 days of testimony and arguments, the jury found that Smith had not defamed the clerk. The trial did not take place at the old courthouse turned museum, distinguished by its clock tower, cupola, and 30-foot Ionic columns. We got out of the car to take photos of this historic structure. Built by slaves and completed in 1858, the courthouse flew the Confederate flag during the battle and siege. Soldiers like Jasper could have seen it from almost any point along the Union line. When the Confederates surrendered on July 4th, 1863, Union soldiers replaced the flag with the Stars and Stripes, and they also raised the flag of Jasper's regiment in recognition of its role in the campaign. Post-war Vicksburg attracted 30,000 liberated men and women. The U.S. Army built schools for the freedmen, and for a time, the city was a model of Reconstruction. I almost got misty-eyed standing there on one of the highest hills in the city as I pondered how far our country had come in 150 years and how far we had yet to go. The struggles and accomplishments on civil rights issues felt more personal because of my family's ties to this Mississippi River city. Jasper had fought here to preserve the Union. Gialver had visited during the tenure of Governor James Vardaman when Jim Crow laws erased all the gains Black Americans had made during Reconstruction, and here I stood, 2 years after our country elected its first African American president. What societal and political changes would the next 150 years bring? I'd been to the Vicksburg National Military Park twice before, once with my parents in 1988, the summer I was a newspaper intern, and once with Steve in 1991, the year I worked in Natchez. On both of those visits, I had admired the impressive Illinois monument and wished the park's Minnesota monument had been more interesting, or at least as interesting as I was. So it blew my mind when I discovered, early in my G. Oliver research, my direct family connection to the Illinois Memorial. When I learned that the names of all 36,325 Illinois soldiers who fought at Vicksburg were listed inside, I knew I had to find Jasper's. During the siege of Vicksburg, Jasper's regiment was positioned near the Shirley House. The house was also near the site where Jasper's regiment made three failed attempts to seize a major Confederate fortification, the 3rd Louisiana Redan. During the June 25, 1863 attack, when the 45th exploded a mine, splinters struck Jasper in the face and arm, injuring his left wrist. He also suffered permanent hearing loss. While we sat near the Shirley House, the park's only surviving wartime structure, and ate a picnic lunch, I contemplated these now remote events. Jasper probably had a few meals around here, Steve said. I nodded. I was thinking that too. Not sun chips, though, I said. Probably hardtack, he guessed. Louisa, who was listening to the conversation, chimed in. They had that on the Mayflower. After lunch, we stepped inside the Illinois Memorial. When we found the bronze plaque for the 45th Regiment, my eyes traveled down the list until I saw the name. I handed Louisa a piece of white paper and a black crayon, and she traced it. Jasper Riggs. It was the cheapest souvenir in the park, but it was priceless to me. I couldn't wait to show it to my dad. Our last stop in the park was the Iowa Memorial. I stared at its bronze relief panels and thought about G. Oliver, the poet-soldier S.H.M. Byers, and the journalist Ernest Sherman. I thought about the ladies of Vicksburg who did not use water in their punch. I thought about invisible connections between generations, and I wondered how often we unknowingly follow in the footsteps of our ancestors. Before we flew home, we spent a few hours at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. It was built around the old Lorraine Motel, where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968, the day after giving his "I've Been to the Mountaintop" speech. I was 3 months old when King was shot outside room 306, and Steve was not yet born. Seeing the room, frozen in time, gave me chills. It also inspired me. Our country might never overcome the stain and scourge of slavery. But we had no choice but to keep moving forward. We had to hope that, with each new generation, we moved closer to becoming a United States of America that was worthy of all those who died for its highest ideals.